talk about education. You know, education doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in communities. People live in communities, schools are communities unto themselves. So what does this mean when we're in an online world? Here to talk about community building and engagement in a virtual setting are Charlie Ursel and Bonnie Leask from Watershed Partners, where they help groups of people respond to complex change. Please join me in welcoming them to the screen. And this was live, so please put any questions you have in the chat and we can address them hopefully towards the end of the session.
Thanks, Jay. Hey, everybody. My name's Charlie Ursel. It's a pleasure to be here today and a pleasure to be in conversation with you. As Jay said, Watershed Partners, we work to solve really big, complex, hairy challenges, often in very high complexity situations. And we primarily do that through a different way of community engagement. So looking forward to sharing some of what we do today. Bonnie.
I did the classic mistake.
Always the mute. Yeah, love it. It's 2020.
I did the classic mistake of keeping the mute on. I'm so sorry, everyone. Good day to wherever you are. My name is Bonnie Leask. I'm from Muskeg Lake Cree Nation, which is a Cree First Nation that is signatory and located within Treaty 6. It's and for if you're like, what, where, huh? That is in what is now called Saskatchewan in the country is what is now called Canada. So I'm coming to you live right from the heart of Treaty 6. And before we get into our presentation, I just want to build on what Jay said about, you know, asking any questions, throw it at us. We're doing this in real time, so we hope that you have a lot of empathy for us. And I'm just going to turn it over to Charlie, and we'll be going back and forth in kind of this conversational style. I hope that it's okay. And I just reminded myself, guys, slow down.
Cool. So community engagement in a virtual setting. We're going to be sharing a slide deck. We have 400 slides and we have about 500 words on each slide in font size 10. At the end of this, there'll be a test for selective questions and answers to understand how much you understood from our presentation.
Kidding. No, there's no test, there's no slide deck, there's nothing. Not that there's nothing, but we're not going to get into like these heavy discussions about what community is and where it can go. We're actually just, like I said, doing this conversation idea. And so what we did when we started building this presentation, it's kind of funny. I'm sure a lot of students do this now, but we went on and we Googled, what does community mean?
So the Google definition is officially a group of people living in the same place or having a particular characteristic in common.
So do you think that that's still, I don't know, Charlie, do you feel like that's an accurate definition of community, given the fact that I honestly haven't left my house in 3 days? And before that, it was quite tepid. So like, I feel like the meanings, a lot of meanings and things have changed over time, and community is one of them. When I was growing up, you know, which everybody hold still, I know I look 20, but I'm actually in my 40s. So when I was growing up, there was no digital space. Like there was no digital community, and TikTok was what the sound made on the clock, okay? Because clocks actually made sound back then. And so when we have these social media spaces, it's a great place where we can share and create and build and do all these great things. But it's actually usurped the idea, the physical idea. It's replaced the physical concept idea of community.
Yeah, so thinking about that definition, Bonnie, that the group of people living in the same place or having a particular characteristic in common, I think you and I are both finding in our work that a bit of that is still very true, that the characteristics in common are probably the most important thing. And I think are increasingly rising in importance, which has its good sides and its bad sides, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. And when you and I have talked about this idea of community, Charlie, like we've had incredible conversations where we just spider out on all these ideas. And we have had these conversations because it's important in the work that we're doing. That when we get into solve or get into work on these really complex problems, yeah, it's probably good to have algebra. So don't stop learning that. But it's also good to understand each other. And that's empathy. And I mentioned it when I made a mistake. So, so I'm asking you to have empathy. But what does that mean to meaningfully and to understand each other, meaningfully? When I think about that, and I think about in the context of my life experiences and my approaches, for me, it's walking in someone else's moccasins. And I know you heard earlier today from Dr. Jeffrey Schiffer at the Native Family and Services in Toronto. So he might have lent some ideas on Indigenous ways of knowing and living. But for my culture, a moccasin is essentially a shoe. So that idea, Charlie, if we're walking in each other's shoes, and when we do that, like, and I've walked, I feel like a little bit through building my relationship with Charlie, is that I've walked a little bit in his moccasins. So I've committed to seeing the world the way Charlie has seen the world, and or what I think he has seen in the world. And the same for Charlie, kind of when we've engaged, like, so we've taken and meaningfully thought about that and meaningfully considered it. And I know what's kind of interesting around empathy, and we've, in personal lives and professional lives, I've used this saying, there's three sides to the truth: my side, your side, and the truth itself. And I think that's another thing to kind of hold on to, because I'm sure you're already facing it, certainly under COVID, that there's difficult times, and with all this kind of transformation taking place globally, you get frustrated. I know I do. And in those moments when I'm getting frustrated, never with Charlie, I have to take that moment, put on those shoes, start in that way to try and remember and communicate, and then take a breath and think about what it's like for the other person. What is it like for the other person on the other side of the Zoom? I don't know. I know what it's like for me, and I know what my context is for around me. And if I'm not actively thinking about that person on the other side, we're not going to move. Oh, we're not going to move a whole lot. Like, we'll still move, but it won't be rewarding. And when you do that, I know this is going to sound kind of out there, but when you do that, you're committing to lifelong learning. And I heard the speaker before speak about lifelong learning and the important, and this is one of those concepts in which you just do all over the time. And the best part about it, the most rewarding experience, is that you're always learning. Okay, but one caveat, just one tiny, small little one. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes engaging. You're going to make mistakes a number of places, and that's okay, because we all make mistakes. Like, I made the mistake of not putting on the mute, even though I knew it was, even though I know mute. Oh God. So we know that, and we don't do it in isolation, just like we don't do a lot of things in isolation. So when you're in those spaces, just go back to empathy. And if it's online or in real life, it's transferable. So it's wonderful. And we want to make sure that we're always connected, right? Like, and we've seen that, like, just exacerbated using big words. There's the 500-page slide deck. We're just using it so much. We're just feeling it so much. So especially right now, having empathy is going to ease so much, especially down the paths that you might lead or go down.
Yeah, and Bonnie, as I listen to you say this, I feel like in all of our work, what's really at the heart of community building and engagement, it's empathy, right? It's walking in someone else's shoes. It's trying to see the world as they see it. There's something I've learned along the years is, if you don't get what's going on, you're probably missing something. I sure miss a whole bunch of things in life, is what I've learned. And we've got a tool we want to share with you around empathy. And it's a tool we found really helpful, both kind of at an individual level with a couple of people working together, at a team level, across organizations, whether they're small companies, big companies, and across whole big systems. And it's called an empathy map. And it's essentially a way of helping to walk in someone else's shoes and using a whole sensory experience. So I'm going to share my screen now, and I'm going to share the one thing that we are going to present through, which is this idea of an empathy map canvas. We'd really like to give credit to a gentleman called Dave Gray, who kind of created the first iteration of this with an exercise called the Big Heads exercise. And we thought, as you and your hackathon teams are thinking about the products that you might build for your target student populations, what's a helpful, easy to use tool? And I can see someone's also kindly put this into the chat box. So there's a PDF worksheet template for this. And it follows the numbers, and it follows sort of a clockwise process. So firstly, we think about the aim. Who are you trying to empathize with? Which students are you trying to understand? Who are they? What's their situation? What do they need to
be teachers?
Yeah, it could be teachers, teaching assistants. Who is that person? And then what do they need? Like, do they need to do things differently? What things do they need to get done? Is it homework? Is it chores? Is it work? And how will we know that they're successful at this? So that's kind of your frame, the first couple of things to think about. And this is where we really walk in each other's shoes and put each other's skins on. We then think about the senses. We all have senses. They don't come across that well in a virtual environment, but we all have them. People at the other end of the screen have got them. What do they see? Think about the eyes at home, on school, on the way to school. What are they watching? What are they reading? What are they playing? What are they saying? What have you heard people say? What can you imagine them say when you're really walking around in their skin? What do they do? What behavior have you observed? What can you imagine them doing? And what do they hear? What are those things that are coming into their ears? What are they hearing other people say? What are they hearing from their friends? What are they hearing from teachers and parents? And once we've thought about that and really wallowed in it, spent time imagining it, using our imagination, what do they think and feel? I'm really focusing on what are their pains? What are their fears, their frustrations, their anxieties? And what are their gains? What are their wants, their needs, their hopes, and their dreams? And in our experience, the basis of any good design is anchored in both empathy and being quite specific about what are those pains and what are those gains that you're really trying to alleviate. So this is a tool, as I said, it's in the chat, and we've got a worksheet which has some PDF boxes that can be filled in and could be really helpful for your hackathon process.
That's awesome, Charlie. We've talked about this empathy map a number of times, and guys, like I've had to use it with my nieces and nephews a few times because they see the world differently too. So I wanted to share this quote. We talked quite a bit about getting ready for this presentation, and then I shared this quote with Charlie, and it resonates the message we really want to leave with you, that we take, like we hold close to our hearts. And I think it really kind of underpins what we're talking about. So rarely do we find people who willingly engage in hard, solid thinking. There's almost a universal quest for easy answers and half-baked solutions. Nothing pains some people more than having to think. And the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. said that, and I actually have it posted on my board. I have it right beside me, because it doesn't mean thinking about algebra. Guys, I'm on the science thing, like stay with the science and math. Balance it out with the empathy and the emotional, and thinking in that sense. That's hard thinking. Because it's not what we're used to. We have a very, very instant culture in our time and space. I want to share, just as we kind of are going towards the end of our presentation here, I want to share our story, Charlie and I's story. And we've talked about this, so I'm not talking for him, and I'm sure he'll jump in if he wants, but our story is about our community and how we've come together. So before February, I had no idea who Charlie Ursel was. Like, he was just I guess, living. I don't know. He wasn't in my community, that's for sure. And then I met him online, and we were working through some potential opportunities to work together. And then we have those little chats. Yeah, we're going to get together someday. We're going to meet. So that hasn't happened, and it hasn't happened for a lot of the world. But instead of allowing that to be a barrier and a challenge, we changed it. We took the time to get to know each other, albeit over Zoom and texting. And because we're working in these really, really, really like complex problems with like so many systems and levels and barriers, and we're like, and that's not easy. And because systems involve people, it's emotional and it's hard work. And so through this work, we've developed beyond the collegial colleague thing, and we're friends. Like, I consider Charlie a very good friend. And that's kind of cool and kind of weird, because like, if you kind of get the context of Canada, we got this like really, really awesome, cool Cree chick, and then you have this British dude, right? So, and then it's like, what? Like, we're like the antithesis of each other. But we've removed that baggage. Like, when we're just like, who are you for you, and who am I for me? And when we get in those situations where there might be a little bit of rub, we stop, we breathe, and we put on each other's shoes, and we work through that empathy map. Now, I'm not saying we grab the actual map and write it down, but these are constant kind of questions that underpin what we do. And sometimes it's easy. Sometimes it's like, okay, I just need to step back. And sometimes it's a little harder, but with that empathy, we figure it out. And so we want to make sure that that is underpinning a lot of the work that you're doing, and the space that you're creating here. So I'm gonna let Charlie kind of make it in conversations, and I'm gonna check the Slack. I wish I wasn't a Luddite. I am, so I have to like do two things at once. So I'm just gonna check the chat.
Yeah, I mean, I've been having a look, Bonnie. I can't see any questions coming in, which either means that that aren't around kind of technology, which either and where things are stored, which either means we've bored everyone to tears and no one's listening, or that we've covered everything and we've been nice and crystal clear.
Everybody's trying to get in our shoes right now. Oh, Jay has a question. Go ahead, Jay.
Yes, I'm just going to use the power vested in me to show up on video for this question.
Incredible.
So I love frameworks. So in my field, frameworks help organize discussions and thinking, and allow people with divergent views to move forward because they're working in a framework. So I love that map you had of the empathy map. And I wonder, as we're talking about a planet and as more things are moving online, can that map be used? I can see how it can be used in a straightforward manner, which is not the same as easily, but straightforward locally, right? With people that you could see or that you might occasionally see. But could I and someone in Eritrea and somebody in the Philippines use that to gain empathy? How does it work on, at a distance?
Really good question, Jay. And like, honestly, that's exactly why we thought this was important. So in the world where we're working globally, we're working with people in different places, different cultural contexts, we feel like this is even more important because our brains ourselves are actually incredible attenuators of information, right? We hardly actually process any of the light waves that come in, any of the sound waves that come into our brain. We naturally attenuate information. When we flip into the 2D world, we get an even greater attenuation of the information and sentiment. And so the job of this becomes a little bit more work, but with the tools we've got, Google Maps, going and actually walking around the place that somebody's in, looking at what the streets are like, looking at what the grocery store is, listening to the music of that culture, of that place, really listening to the songs, the meaning behind some of those lyrics, some of those songs, picturing what the smells might be like. There's a certain spices are used in certain parts of the world, and maybe raiding the kitchen cupboard to see what those spices smell like, to really empathize with somebody and amplify as opposed to attenuate, dumb down the senses. That's a really great question, and we feel like this is an even more important tool in the digital world.
And so have you seen it in use? Because, you know, one of the side effects of the pandemic may be that travel, which is a great way to build empathy, may be reduced. So we may have to do it more and more remotely. So I'm just curious if you've actually seen your framework being used across wide distances.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I feel like for sure. And coming into Watershed Partners isn't a traditional space for somebody like me, that I don't have I don't have a design background, but I do have a system background. And so I had to open myself up. And that's another concept that can be covered in its entirety, is vulnerability. And when you do that, when I was vulnerable to understand this space, I had to use that map because sometimes it was a little bit at odds of what I was thinking. And then I was like, whoa. Then I took a breath and started to think. So I don't know if Charlie, you've had that same experience in either the collegial connections or in some of the work that we've done.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe I'll link the answer into a question that's coming as well, of factors that we should consider when using it to be effective. It's great to hear that it's a helpful tool. It's very easy to do what you think someone else might be, right? Like, and that's the easy work of this. But actually closing your eyes and imagining what it's like to be that other person is something subtly but importantly different, right? I feel like generative conversations are a way to help us get there, having as many conversations and really being curious, asking like, so how is that? Like, tell me more. I'd really like to understand more. What does that feel like? What do these foods that you're eating taste and smell like? Those kinds of, I was working with an international community recently, and someone was in Ethiopia and they were having their dinner, and they shared the textures, the flavors of what they were eating. And it really helped the whole group in a virtual context understand the context that person had. And so this is, to Bonnie's point that she finished with, was this isn't easy, right? Like, it's hard work. It's relatively easy for me to imagine what it would be like for me to be Bonnie. It's even harder for me to imagine what Bonnie's situation and context is like. And I think often stepping away from the professional and looking, and this is another question that's come in, perfect timing, almost read my mind. The bit that's easy to overlook is it's kind of getting down to business. We're going to build this thing, like I imagine in this hackathon context, we've got this problem we're trying to solve, and we're looking narrowly at that. But looking broadly and serendipitously, looking at like, what pets do you have? What animals do you have in your context, for example? Those questions that you wouldn't normally consider if we're just looking through a narrow thing if we're solving this problem, but trying to broaden the horizon and understand the whole context that somebody's sitting within, that they're working within, and what their world is really like is so important.
And going past, I think what's important when you talk about overlooking something, going past kind of traditional history books, and Charlie keeps hitting it on and on by, you know, reaching out, asking these questions, because what might be written down might not really reflect the context. And that's important too. And in some spaces that often gets overlooked. So I would really encourage like those really hard, like those really kind of seemingly easy questions, really reflect on the answer.
Yeah, this is incredibly powerful because it connects to a talk we had earlier from Rashad, gonna get the name right, Rashad Robinson, about social and racial justice. And he talked about, you know, getting to know the other people's experiences and putting yourself in their shoes. And it was a similar idea, but framed from a totally different angle. So to have these two things connect here when you come at it from two different directions is extremely powerful.
Yeah.
Oh, we'd love to say we planned that, man, but there's no way we did. The joy of serendipity and bringing interesting people together,
yeah,
right?
Just shows how that the idea is the right idea. I guess that's the way to put it. So it seems like that's it for the questions. So I think we're set and we'll continue. Thank you both for your session. The camaraderie and the, you know, the friendship that you guys have is palpable. It even comes through on the through the Zoom. So it really made for a refreshing and informative session. Thank you.
That's awesome. And thank you, Jay. Just before we sign off, it really is our honor when we're able to kind of connect these ways, even though it's not in a traditional way. It's our honor when we see youth coming up and be able to kind of inflect experiences and ways of doing. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Convergence team doing such an awesome job. Pleasure to be here.